Hi, I'm Iris Muller. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and a proud mom of 2 children, one of whom has quadriplegic cerebral palsy and is nonverbal.
And I'm Alma Schneider, a licensed clinical social worker and the proud mom of 4 children, one of whom has Prader-Willi syndrome.
In this podcast, we discuss the uncensored truth about raising kids with disabilities.
Prepare to laugh, cry, and hopefully learn something new. This is Two Moms, No Fluff. Hello and welcome to Two Moms, No Fluff. I'm Alma and I'm here with my friend Iris. And if this is your first time, we are so happy that you're here. We share our experiences and swap stories about what life is like raising children with disabilities. Hello, Iris.
Hello, Alma. Today we are going to actually record something that would be, at least for Alma and I, quite hard, but we're doing it in favor of new parents of kids with disabilities. So maybe to make their experience a little bit less lonely. And we are going to dive into one of the hardest topics to talk about. And this is, how does it feel like to get a new diagnosis for your child? And I hope that people understand. Again, we are trying to record one shot, no editing. So you guys really see our reaction and emotions and where we pause to take a breath, because this is not an easy thing to share. But hopefully someone can gain something from our experiences. And I don't know, Alma, we didn't discuss this, but do you want to start? Do you want me to begin? Where do we begin?
It's up to you. I'm happy to start. Happy to have you start. Who's braced themselves more to tackle this discussion?
So I don't know.
Ain't easy.
Yeah, so I can actually start with sharing our experience. We had kind of a grace period that not too many families get between the time that our daughter was born until we actually learned that something is not quite right, let's put it this way. And I think that my kind of journey with the realization was maybe some parents do have that route, that you kind of notice on your own that something is not what it is supposed to be. And I had a lot of experience working actually as a teacher in kindergartens and childcare centers. And I also had experience working with people with disabilities before I had my daughter. And I would look at her movement and I would constantly tell myself, but I remember the other babies rolling at 3 months. I probably don't remember right. And I remember them starting to crawl at 5 to 6 months. And I would read the milestones and I'm I would tell myself, I'm just stressing myself out because I'm a new mom. And I would look at my daughter's movement and I would think to myself, wow, she really does move like someone with cerebral palsy. And then I would tell myself, what kind of a mother looks at her own baby like that and thinks such horrible things over her own child? But how do you say, never underestimate the power of denial. And I continued on like that for a long time until it was kind of like the nagging question in my head could not let me rest anymore. And then we went back to the pediatrician and said, listen, this can't be right. And then the pediatrician was like, oh, this is not right. And finally kind of grasping the reality of the situation with our child. And then, of course, we were directed into so many different, appointments for a neurologist and child developmental, experts. And basically, in that process of the in-between that appointment and all the other appointments that followed, I started doing the horrible online search that many parents are very familiar with.
First mistake. And I'm guilty as well.
Yeah, and Alma, I don't know kind of how it is for other people, but I was at our university housing evening time on my own, kind of doing the research online. My daughter was on the floor on a little kind of receiving blanket, playing, on her own. and all content. And then I start reading like all that, the dots, connecting all the dots, and all the dots kind of connect to your baby would never be able to like walk or use their hands or sit independently or control their movement, never be able to talk, and would probably have mental retardation. And I'm just like, as the sentences accumulate, I could like feel myself like the blood was draining out of my body. And with all of my, I already had my master's in rehabilitation counseling, and I was so kind of professionally prepared for this moment, but everything collapsed. And I left the computer and went to the other room, to the window, with the full intention of throwing myself out the window that time. And I was like, and as I'm standing there, all panicky and just wanting to die, I realized two things. A, that jumping from a second floor window would not help. The worst case scenario, I'll just injure myself and it would be just idiotic. And B, that there would be no one in the whole world that would ever take care of my daughter as well as I could. And that I can't do anything to harm myself, because if I love my daughter, which I do, her future is dependent on me. And I reversed myself. And I called my brother and I told him, listen, I just read online and I understand that Karen would never be able to talk or walk or sit or read, and she's probably never going to be like able to do anything, etc., etc. And my brother told me one of the smartest things that a person in this situation can tell another person, and that was, I really don't know what to tell you. And yeah, because you can't tell anything to anyone in this situation. It's just too much. And we were kind of not talking for a while. And then I disconnected the call with my brother and called a friend, not a very good friend, but another mom that I knew from, I guess, La Leche League or something. And I said, please come. I just cannot be by myself. It's an emergency. Can you please come? And she just dropped everything, took her baby and came over. And she stayed with me in the house until my husband came back from, he was in an MBA class at that time. But the rest of it, I'll tell you later. I'll kind of like clear the stage to you, Alma. But that's my self-realization, diagnostic, I guess, story.
Well, thanks for your honesty and bravery in telling your story. I know, for me, it's very, it's painful to go back to that time period, and it brings it back up. It is traumatic, and we always say this, but it's more traumatic not because of our kids, but because of society and how society feels about disability. And my main, I don't even know where to begin, but my story is different in the sense that mine was immediate. My diagnosis was immediately after birth. My pregnancy was completely, well, I shouldn't say completely typical. I had gained a tremendous amount of weight, much more than my other two kids. And I was told that I had extra amniotic fluid, but it's not a big deal. That's normal. That's why I was so big. And the baby was 2 weeks late. And that was odd as well, because the other two were not 2 weeks late. I ended up, so I started, I already had this feeling of like, this is different from my other pregnancies. And the doctors, I had midwives at the time, and they decided to induce, and it went from inducing the baby to an emergency C-section, because the baby was sitting on a nerve, and everything was very quick. But they did the C-section, and he came out not crying, was only 6 pounds 7 ounces, and looked kind of gray to me. And I immediately knew something was off. And the doctors were like, oh no, everything's okay. The APGAR test is showing everything's fine. But the first thing out of my mouth was, something's wrong. Something's wrong, because he was so small and not crying. And I just knew instinctively something was wrong. The next thing I knew, he was in the NICU, and because they said he couldn't suck. and they didn't know what was going on, but they had whisked him away, and I was left there like, what's going on? He didn't suck, so they kept him in the NICU. And what happened for about a week, they were doing all sorts of tests. He was in the NICU, and there had been a baby born 6 months prior in the hospital in New York who presented with similar features and similar, low muscle tone and just some other features that made them test for Prader-Willi syndrome. So within a week, they had the diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. I found out, I was in the hospital at that time, and my sister, one of my sisters, was with me in the hospital, and my husband was at work, I believe, and the doctor, the NICU doctor called me in and was pretty arrogant and was like, "I figured it out." And I said, "Oh my God." He said, "Is your husband here?" I said, "No, but my sister was there with me." So he didn't, the first problem was that he didn't ask me to like get my husband on the phone or anything like that. So he sat me down with my sister and he said, I thought it was this, and it is this. I was right. He has what's called Prader-Willi syndrome. And he starts describing it in a way that was it was as though he were reading a paragraph out of a medical textbook. He's like, he will want to eat all the time. Anything that's not nailed down, first he did say he will be able to walk and he will be able to talk, but he will want to eat anything that is not nailed down. And he have to be watched all the time, and he will be very good at puzzles. So I sat there and I looked at my sister, and we just both started laughing, because that's what we Schneiders do when we're uncomfortable. And we started laughing like, you got to be kidding me. And we had a lot of food and weight issues growing up in my house. So of all disabilities and all syndromes, to have a syndrome where somebody had zero control over eating was so perverse to me. And we started laughing. We're like, you've got to be kidding that this is what he's got. And I just remember going into the bathroom, leaving him and going into the bathroom. And I'm going to get a little graphic here. I hope it's all right. But I had been on a bunch of meds.
You're with friends.
I know, we're here with friends. But we had, I'd been on narcotics because I had had a C-section. So I was very stopped up. And we went to the bathroom, and I just exploded. I had a gastrointestinal explosion. Because it was like my body just collapsed. And I remember, and my sister will remember this, I was moaning in the bathroom. It was like a primal. I'm going to start crying just thinking about it. I had a primal. I just remember being on the toilet going like, oh, like I literally, it was like an animal, like a wounded animal, and making these noises and like in total gastrointestinal distress. And, my poor sister had to like be there with me, but, I was so glad she was there. But the beauty of this situation was that I was able to provide my husband, who was at home and knew nothing about this diagnosis yet, I was able to give him the diagnosis in a way that was much kinder, I thought, and couched in a lot more positivity than the doctor had given me. So I just remember going home and we lived, in New Jersey. We came from the hospital in the city, and we were eating dinner, and my sister was like, you have to tell him, or no, she said, don't tell him until after dinner, let him enjoy a nice dinner. And I was sitting there with this burden of information on, in me, and waiting. I don't know if that was the right thing to do, to wait or not, but I gave him one last peaceful dinner before he had to think about this. I remember I brought him into the basement, and I said, I have to tell you something. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. But we have a diagnosis, and this is what it is. And I just remember we both started, crying right there. And what I forgot to say is that the doctor did say to me, go home and go online and read about it, which was the worst advice in the world, because especially back then, 17 years ago, the information online was so negative. There wasn't. It was just the worst. The worst features of the syndrome were written out and exaggerated, and the photos were just so awful. They were for people who had not been treated, or who were diagnosed very late and were, morbidly obese. It was horrible. We went online, and I just remember us sobbing as we're reading this stuff online. And I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to not go online. I know it's almost impossible, and we're kind of drawn to the information, but it left such a lasting impression of how horrible this was going to be. And it's never as horrible as it's going to be portrayed online. It's just not. You need to talk to someone who is experiencing this, and going online just is such a cold, unfeeling way to learn about your child. So in contrast to you, Iris, well, you mentioned you went to the window. I felt like I remember explaining it to a friend who I spoke with, that I felt like somebody had dropped a ton of bricks on me, and I was just like there under a bunch of bricks. And that's physically, I had this physical reaction and this depression, like this, because I was like, what? I had guilt, like horrible guilt, like, what did I do to my family? How could I have been so greedy to have another child? Look what I've done. Just all these horrible feelings, and this physical reaction of, there are a bunch of bricks on me and I can't get up. And the panic and the fear of what our lives were going to become, because online it really made it seem like our lives were over. And again, in contrast to your experience, I had zero relationship with my son at this point. He was 1 week old, and I didn't know him. I had zero connection to him, because he was in the NICU and they were feeding him through the nose. Through a nose, tube. At that point, 2 weeks later, he was going to get surgery to get a G tube in his stomach. There was very little time to do kangaroo care like you did, where you have the baby have, skin to skin. There was very little time for that. And to be honest, I wasn't even, interested in that. Because I was so focused on getting him fed, and I didn't know this baby, and I didn't have a connection to him yet. And I want to, for all the people out there who feel so, or felt so guilty about those kinds of feelings, you are not alone. That is so fear-based. I was just so afraid of this, of what this baby represented, having had no connection at all at that point. There's so much guilt there, and guilt and fear and pain. And it's so important that we know that this is normal. Like, this is a normal reaction of fear. And, some people immediately feel the bond and feel the connection, but a lot of people don't, because we're so caught up in the trauma and the pain and the shock that all we see is, we're afraid. And that's how I felt. And it was very, very difficult. And I'll stop there to give you the stage back. But that was my very beginning of being told. Um, and I'll add a little bit more after
Yeah.
you.
I also I notice how the effect, of me telling the story and you telling the story is so different.
Mm-hmm.
And in so many ways, I feel probably trauma therapy worked because I
Yes.
can look back at the story and look back at myself, and I am compassionate to the person that I was once, back then in that situation. And I remember the feeling being so strong and heavy and hard to deal with. But today it does in a way almost, it looks almost like funny to me that I reacted that way, that I don't know or didn't know back then what I know today. Would I go back and change everything that happened after that? Some of it, yes, because it was like our life is so hard. Like there isn't a way to kind of beautify it. We
Yeah.
have a really complex, hard life, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also so many good things that happened because of Karen, through Karen,
Yes.
through that very special experience, that I wish I could like go back today to that person
Mm-hmm.
and just calm her down and tell her that this is not what you feel. It's not what you're used to, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a worthy journey
Yes.
nevertheless, and
Yes.
maybe very different than all the hopes and dreams that we're fed maybe through societal expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But love is love is love, and
Yep.
if you have a loving relationship with your child or with anyone else, you really don't maybe expect anything in return that is by a certain book or another. And I
It's a
think
different
that,
life. It's a different life.
yeah,
And I know, I hope that everyone has read Welcome to Holland. I know a lot of people do not like the essay Welcome to Holland.
I don't like it.
You don't like it. I love it. It really helped me tremendously when somebody sent it to me. Another mom of a child with Prader-Willi syndrome sent it to me, and I remember it was very helpful. It's basically, if you're listening to this and you don't know what Welcome to Holland is, it's an essay written by, I forget her name, but it's an essay about having a child that you didn't expect, but that there are beautiful things about that child, that you'll come to appreciate. And it is true. That sentiment, for me at least, is extremely true. It took a while to get there, to sift through all the what all the loss and grief. And we have to own that there is loss. There's a feeling of loss and there is a feeling of grief. But once we truly get to know our children, there are so many beautiful things about our kids, and the pain and the grief, it subsides, and it will always be there on a certain level when we do see other children and other, a life not lived by us. But we have a different kind of life, and it's simply a different kind of life that has such magnificent beauty and lessons in it. And the people, we talk about this in our Silver Linings episode that I hope, that you'll all listen to. But there are so many incredible things that come out of having a child with, any child, not just a child with a disability, any child. There are positive things and there are negative things. And um, that's so important to remember. And you can't necessarily feel it when you get the diagnosis because it's a shock. And it's society. I remember early on saying, if everybody had a child with Prader-Willi syndrome, I wouldn't be so upset. But because we're othered, that's where the fear comes in, and the pain and the isolation. For me, it was the fear of isolation, that we were going to be shunned by everyone, that people were not going to want to hang out with us. We were going to lose our friends. We were going to not be a part of the community anymore, because these behaviors that were described online were so exaggerated and made to seem totally unmanageable, like a life that would be unmanageable. And it's not the case. And I wish, if I went back to that person from back then, I wish, that people, and I did have some people who did describe, and I'm so grateful to some of the people in the Prader-Willi syndrome community, who said, like, we just do it differently. We just do it differently. And I'm really grateful to those people, because having that connection with people who are going through it, it's so important. And great advice that somebody once gave me is, don't talk to people who are way ahead of you. Just talk to people who are a little bit ahead of you, who can give you practical information to help you, but that you won't get freaked out by some stuff that happens way down the road, because you don't know if that's going to be your child or not. And you don't need to get scared or overwhelmed with that. And that was great advice, because I did steer clear of much older people who had it.
Yeah, I think that one thing that again, we had like the opportunity to be home alone, digesting the news, and not have the interruption, if I may call it this way, of professionals that do, as you mentioned, sometimes come with their egos, their agenda, their kind of maybe preconceived notions about things. And that was like, there were many blessings in our lives, but this is something that I also count as a blessing, the fact that we were able to maybe later on as a couple digest the news kind of on our own. And then it made all the blows that came afterwards a little bit more bearable, because we were somewhat emotionally prepared. Until I think after one appointment, my husband told me something. It's like, I don't care anymore. They can't, what else can they tell us that's not working? Everything is not working by now. They can't give us more bad news. I'm immune to this by now, because I heard everything. So he's like, we're going to like deal with this, and we shouldn't like get worked up before another appointment or before another conversation with one more professional. It's the new diagnosis is very hard on a personal level, and as the complexity of the diagnosis is, the complexity or the length of time that it takes an individual to digest and actually understand what it means. It's a process that takes months and sometimes years just to understand, what's going on here. And in addition to that, especially, I don't know how it is for single parents, because I wasn't in that position myself. And what I did learn in this experience is that everything that I learned as a professional doesn't quite hold water when it comes to reality. And so I would say, with all honesty, I don't know how the process is for someone who's a single parent, but in the kind of couples dynamic, there's also that back and forth. This is two different people with two different backgrounds, two different expectations from the baby or from life. And you now need to navigate also the gaps between the, I guess, imaginary future child and the reality of that dream being shredded into pieces, kind of smashed on the floor in front of you. And how do you pick up those pieces, and what do you make of it? And that is such like a really delicate situation to be with. And I think that for families and friends and the community, people that surround that I guess couple or that young family in that process, there is really something that is very important that was, as I mentioned in another episode, really lacking in our family. It's that the support, like keeping the couple together, because that is all that is left at that moment. These two adults, and nobody else understands, because nobody else can really understand what it means and how it feels and what it would imply for the future, to really help protect and defend that nest so it stays intact. Because the best prospect for that baby's future is if the parents can really work together to continue to love the baby and to continue to provide the best support for his or her future.
Yeah, and even if it's a single person who's embarking on this journey, family members can play that role. They really can. It's not the same as a romantic partner, but family members and friends, the community can really be a part of that support system. And again, it might not be as intimate or personal because the baby didn't come from the two of you, but a lot of people adopt and have or do this by themselves with a sperm donor. Anybody who um, is in this position, please get support from whether it's your family, your friends, or a therapist. It's vitally important. I threw myself into therapy immediately when this happened, and it was hugely beneficial for me to sort out a lot of these issues that I had. We've talked about narcissistic injury, like what did I, this is a reflection of me. In our case, the syndrome is a fluke at conception, but it's still the fact that it is your child can bring up all sorts of issues. The fact that you did this on your own can bring up all sorts of issues. I mean, this is so laden. There are so many levels of complex feelings and conflicting feelings when this happens, and it's so important to speak to someone, a professional, if you're struggling. Some people don't struggle. Some people just jump right in, and I've spoken to people that I can't even believe how seamlessly they adjust to this life and seem very well adjusted. But for most of us, we need some professional help, and we might need some medication, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. I wish that I had been on drugs back then. I think it would have helped me quite a bit to take medication for this time period. A lot of people do, and they're new, and no judgment there, because this is an extraordinarily challenging situation. And again, it's made to be that way because of society, not because of our children, because of society. And it's really important that we own that, and that we can be parents, and we can take care of our kids, and we can love our kids, and we are going to see the positives in this situation soon enough. Once our baby starts smiling, once people start in our environment are positive about it, it's so helpful to have just even the littlest bits of support. And I'm remembering my friend Maggie, when I told her the diagnosis. I was on the phone, I was on the phone with her, and I'm there, and I am so down and depressed. I get this diagnosis, and this is so great about her. She yells, "Oh my God, that's fantastic! That's what it is. He's gonna walk and talk. I thought he was gonna be, I don't know what." And I just remember that reaction, and it really lifted me up, because it took me out of my my wallowing in this. She saw the positives, like, oh my God, he's gonna walk and talk. And she forgot about all the other stuff that, the challenges that we were going to be facing. To her, like, she just brought up something positive, and she was right. And with you, your child is extremely bright, and there are positives in this situation, and it's really nice. And I hope everyone has a friend who can lift you out of that, and be able to look at it objectively, and parse out the good. So really, it's so important to surround ourselves with positive people, not people who are minimizing it, because we need to make a distinction there. When people deny that there's anything that's problematic or going to be challenging, and just makes everything roses and rainbows, that is not helpful either, because that's not acknowledging where we are. So you want to, as we mentioned in another, episode, like, to have somebody say, this frickin' sucks. This frickin' sucks right now. You are in a terrible state, but it's going to change. It's going to change. So you never want to push, you know, you need to be happy. You need to be happy. You have a baby, you know, that's not helpful. What is helpful is to acknowledge this is not what you expected. This is, you know, it's going to be a different path, but it's going to be okay, because this, you're going to create a community, you know, you're going to have community, other people, we're going to connect you with other people. And, you know, a lot of people did that for me. My friend Abby, who's a social worker, she immediately connected me with the national organizations to get information. It's, it's so important to hold a space so that we can grieve, but then to help us see the positives by, you know, whatever it is that we need, and ask us, you know, what would be helpful for you right now? What can I do? And maybe there's nothing, but just being a good friend, and a good, you know, family member to help with whatever you can is sometimes just what the doctor orders.
Yeah, I, I have to say, like, I think both of us, probably because of our professional background, we immediately seeked professional help. And that's not always the situation for a lot of couples, a lot of families. They're kind of also so busy with the, like, doing and being for the child, that they don't have the time or space to really focus on what goes on internally. But I really do think that, you know, it helped us a lot, like, as individuals and as couple. And I mean, about my husband and myself, I hope it really helped you, Alma, as well. But it was really hard, like the beginning period of time. And again, I remember that night in which I understood, basically, I kind of connected different words and different things that I saw. And I remember it, like, very clearly, really, to the action of how I'm stepping up and how I'm approaching the window and all that. But I really don't have the hard pain that is attached to it anymore. But because at the end of the day, so many things happened since then. But I do remember also very, very clearly how the following months were kind of like shadowed by this, like, gray cloud that followed me everywhere. And yes, I was, as I said in another episode, like, angry that the sun was shining, angry that other people were driving and playing in the playground with their kids. This is the end of the world and people don't see it. And it was really annoying.
I felt the same way too. I was like, how can people read a People magazine?
Yeah.
It's so frivolous. I just remember, like, who cares about celebrities and their lives? How can people read these magazines when I'm going through this?
I know. It's just it's a hard thing. You think that you've been, like, kind of cast out from society, that neither your child or your family would have room in the normalcy that once was your life. And the thing that was hardest for me was that every time I would look at Karen, at my daughter, I would, like, she is so innocent. She's so kind of perfect. She hasn't done anything to anyone ever. Like, why would she be selected to live a life of misery like that? Why would she have to carry a burden? Like, she has done nothing wrong to anyone. And I was just like, this is so unfair. And I just, like, the unfairness of it was the thing that occupied me the most. Like, why she? Why she? It's not logical, but that was my thing. And
no, mine too. Mine was why us? You know, why us? Because I didn't have a connection to the baby yet. And I was just like, why us? Like, it's not fair. And I would say that all the time. And my husband would say, it's not about fairness. It just happens. And there was, like, this, you know, we just saw it so different. Like, he was like, this, it's, nobody chose for this. I was like, but it was this feeling of, like, it's not fair. Why us? Why did this have to happen to our family? And just, so many so many feelings, and so upset seeing a pregnant woman. Oh my God. Every time I saw a pregnant woman, it was just awful. I just wanted to
For me,
sick.
it was seeing babies, seeing other babies
Yeah.
hold the toy, put something in their mouth, crawling, walking, talking, all of those things that happen. You know what? In my home birth kind of group, we had like a group for that, and then in the La Leche League meetings and all of those other babies, they were slapping me in the face left and right with their normalcy. And what was even more infuriating is the moms that would sit and have their coffee, not noticing the magic that is happening in front of their eyes. Like, I so wanted them to be grateful, to be crying with joy that their kid has started walking. Then, oh yeah, he started walking yesterday. That was so funny. I'm just like, it's not funny. It's the biggest miracle on earth. Like, why are you two like more appreciative of what's happening here? And that also, of course, when I had my second child, I looked at life from a different angle altogether, and I was like grateful from day one that he was able to bring his hand to his face. I'm just like, oh my gosh, and everything was such like a celebration. But
it's perspective. It's so interesting.
Exactly.
It's perspective. I remember, we'll talk about it, more in another episode, but I just remember holding my fourth kid, and I would just look at Brian and say, like, this is the easiest thing in the world. Like, can you believe, like, I'd just be holding her and she'd be nursing because he couldn't nurse. Like, can you believe people complain about babies? Like, this is the easiest thing in the world, because the amount of paraphernalia and just to leave the house, what we needed to leave the house to just keep him alive was so involved. And it really changed, and there's something really beautiful about that we, you really appreciate more. And there's something very positive about that, and appreciate more with your own child. I remember somebody telling me, another mom who had a child with Prader-Willi syndrome, saying you really appreciate them when they're something you would take for granted with a typical child. Once your child learns how to tie their shoe, and I remember thinking like, oh, that's so depressing when she told me that. But then years later, I got it. And I was like, and there was a great joy in seeing that my son could do these certain things, and you appreciate these things so much more. You don't take them for granted. And there's something really amazing about that. And it makes you live your life in a very different way and appreciate things in a very different way. And as we've said before, and we'll continue saying in this podcast, it makes for a much richer life, because we are aware. We have so much more mindfulness and awareness of the little things, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, the climb that we have to climb is much higher, but when we get there, the view is much nicer.
And beautifully said.
I should be a poet.
I think you are a poet. And I think we should leave it on that note. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Iris?
Not today. It's a heavy topic. I'm glad to be done.
This is heavy. Please, as always, please comment and let us know if you want to share your story with us in the comments, or if you have a suggestion for a future episode related to this or something else. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
For more information, please go to www.twomomsnofluff.com. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give it a 5-star rating so more people can hear it. Thank you.